I'm really curious about this because you have a journalism background. Lee Strobel talks about the time when he was writing, for the Chicago Sun-Times. And in the newsroom, they used to have a sign that says, if your mother tells you she loves you, check it out first, right? That was the imprimatur. That was the ethos of journalism, say in the 60s, 50s, 70s, things like that. Before that, you also had, yellow journalism rags, right? Hearst is famous for having biases, but you understood that. You understood what you were buying, and so you would buy one from each. Maybe you could hear counterfactuals. But nowadays, I feel that the newer generations who come up into journalism don't feel that unbiased reporting is something to strive for. They feel that there is a moral impetus on them to project just one view and sell that just one view. And that's tainted both across secular lines, but Christian journalists are still coming out of basic journalism schools and basic journalism teachings. Do you think that there's something there that's different today than there was, say, even 100 years ago with the yellow journalism issues? And if so, then, I know that we've pointed to alternate media, like social media, like blogs and things like that. But even Douglas Murray has just recently gone on Joe Rogan and said the problem is that anybody who has an opinion can get up here, and you're not trusting the experts to be experts. So it's a pretty complicated issue, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
You're exactly right. It is a complicated issue. I do think there's something different. When I was in journalism school, actually in the mid-1980s, I'm dating how old I am, as an undergraduate, you could already see the change, because we were being told that this idea of objectivity or being unbiased was a myth, and that our goal was to hold people accountable, which meant for a particular point of view. Not to give both sides, to determine which sides were worth giving. And so I saw that even happening then. Now, there was a little bit of a difference between older journalism professors at the secular school I attended and younger ones. The younger ones were the ones who were most pushing this view. The older ones were a little more wedded to the earlier view, but you could see in real time. So I can actually see how why this change might come across. And I would say that really, in my experience dealing with media people for the past 20 years at the highest levels, there are still some who do have the, let's verify, let's ask tough questions of everyone. And I actually respect those. I will, give credit for where credit's due. I can think of a reporter for Newsweek and another reporter for the New York Times, both of which were really upfront about their skepticism of intelligent design, but they were so upfront, they were willing to ask questions, allow you to actually answer the criticisms of their side. And they didn't just accept what the other side said. And so did they publish favorable, coverage? Not exactly, but it was fair. And that's all you could ask for. But unfortunately, I remember those because they stand out.
Right.
But I remember so many others that didn't. And in fact, just for anyone who deals with the I guess, I don't know what we call it, the establishment news media now, just a bit of advice. If a reporter comes to you, especially at the national level, and pledges about just how fair they are and how much they want to share the story, run away. Because it almost without fail, if not without fail, reporters who make those claims, and I've had it even at Fox News, because on some cultural issues, Fox News is not very, very good. They claim, I want to be fair and balanced, or I'm going to do this. They're lying to you. Whereas the best reporters I've had were those who actually, to my face, were willing to say, well, I'm skeptical on this. You say this, but what's the evidence? Because they don't have a completely pre-written script. They're actually wanting to get the evidence. So there is a dramatic change on that. But you point out, rightly so, that any sort of free-for-all also raises problems. But I guess what I'm pointing out is that this idea of if the gatekeepers are corrupt, that's not the great alternative. And so many people who attack the free-for-all are saying, so you need gatekeepers. Well, yeah, you do. You do need experts. You need this. But so that's why we have to rely on this. No, that the reason we have the flourishing of all sorts of news sources is because of how corrupt the gatekeepers have been. Now, I do think this means that people need to be discerning. And in one part of the book, actually at the end of the chapter dealing with the media and these other information sources, I talk about the Bereans in the Bible. When the gospel came to the Bereans, what did they do? Did they just say, oh, Paul or Peter said it, I'm going to accept it? No, they compared what they said to the scriptures, they discussed it. And so I do think that what people need to do is when they find the other alternate sources, they need to do some discernment. They shouldn't just accept what anyone posts on X or Facebook for that matter, or go to any tabloid journalism on the other side that just pushes all their buttons. They need to do some investigations and try out and maybe read some things on different sides intentionally and see how accurate these other sources are. And then, do go, and I'm not saying I'm the be-all, end-all, because I'm not, but I do offer at StockholmSyndromeChristianity.com in the resources section, on the section on the media, a lot of different potential sources that I think are fairly reputable. I also note some of their criticisms on some of them. So I do think that people do need to be discerning. And I have seen, frankly, there are some worrying trends, even among Christians, who imbibe some stuff that goes in very dark directions because they haven't used discernment.
There's a really good book. It's a little dated. I think it was written in the 60s by Jacques Ellul called Propaganda, The Formation of Men's Attitudes. It's a dense read, but I think that is a seminal book on trying to understand how mass media works. At the time, of course, Ellul was right, there's no internet or social media. So if anything, the problems only got exacerbated with the new technology. But I would definitely recommend that. I mean, one thing, so we've kind of, in one sense, you could say for a lot of these gatekeepers, say the gatekeepers, one motivation for trying to lead their institutions, their organizations, their outlets, their platforms in the direction could be something like ignorance. They're living in a sort of social, to use Charles Taylor's term, a social imaginary that they think they have to sort of get in line with because they have not exposed themselves to the alternative arguments, the counter arguments, the alternative sources, etc. So they may be genuine in the sense of they're leading the flock where they think, truth lies. But then there are other motivations that are less maybe genuine and more disingenuous, right? Than just sort of ignorance. I mean, I would say, like, one thing I've noticed with regards to engaging online material with regards to the Bible. I mean, you would think what we consume online Christian apologetics material and atheists, the atheists that are out there, you would think that the only New Testament scholars in the world are Bart Ehrman and Mike Licona, and maybe Dale Allison, so, as if there are no other. Now that might not be the fault of the people with the platforms. It may be just there's a lot of conservative scholars who just don't necessarily want to come on platforms like that, or they're too busy. They're just doing their scholarship. But there is a bias there, right? I think, Lydia McGrew has been upsetting that apple cart a little bit recently, at least with regards to New Testament scholarship. But yeah, it's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right that for some people are doing this out of ignorance. Some people are doing it because they're true believers in what they believe, and the other stuff is nonsense, so they don't want to give it a platform. But I'll say, actually, and I'm speaking specifically about the evangelical Christian community, a lot of the gatekeepers in the evangelical Christian community, this will sound harsh, but they know what they're doing. And in many cases, they're at places that they have to mouth the words, say, inerrancy, or they have to mouth the words pro-life, or they have to mouth, but they themselves really aren't.
Yeah.
And what they're doing is not honest and disingenuous. And we experienced this, say, in the debate over intelligent design. I remember a number of years ago now, Christianity Today had a cover story about the historical Adam, which basically was an argument that there really wasn't a true historical Adam as the the parent of the entire human race. And it was an entire cover story, and it was a garbage article. Why was it a garbage article? Because it was basically a press release for BioLogos, which is Francis Collins to start a group to promote theistic evolution. I'm not against them covering those arguments, but it was so one-sided, and it wasn't because they didn't know of people on the other side. They chose, the author chose, or the editors, maybe it was cut out, chose not to interview the people on the other side and to make a one-sided article. And so, I don't know Daniel Silliman, who is the person who wrote the most recent thing about the nailed to the cross, or Jesus not being nailed to the cross. But I find it extremely hard to believe that neither he nor any of his editors knew that there would be some other scholars out there who would be, defend the traditional view. And frankly, if they didn't know, they should have known on this. For a genuine reporting, you would want to find out if there were. So I think that, I am discouraged by people who always jump to that, well, someone is morally at fault or a wicked person because they don't believe how I do, and I think that is a danger, and I have seen that, and I have to try to guard against it. I'm not perfect at all, so some people think I'm being super judgmental here, but there also is a case where people are, where it's just so clear that they're not following their own stated standards, that they're being hypocrites with their own stated standards, that you do have to say that there's something more going on here than just innocence. And let me give an example, not in my book. In my book, you mentioned, I start with the Bible, and then I deal with science. We get into some of these other things, cultural or political. My book, in my view, is not about politics. So Megan Basham wrote a book that was very controversial called, which I like, actually, and I've defended, Shepherds for Sale, that does focus on a lot of political things. I chose not to do that because I thought there was some more fundamental issues. But I want to give one example she gave from her book. And this is, teasing out, how do you tease out whether someone's being just ignorant or they're sort of being willful in this?
Right. There's more.
She had this brief critique of Gavin Ortland, who is someone I don't know personally. And before her book, I really didn't know much about global warming. And this is not something I'm taking a position on in my book. I don't cover it. But she pointed out that he gave this video presentation that was really one-sided about global warming catastrophism. And then I went and watched what she was writing about myself, not just based on her reports, because he objected. And what was very interesting, because he got very, very angry and said some really nasty things personally about Megan Basham, about how horrible she was. But when I went and actually viewed what he said, her account was mostly accurate, and his account of what he said was not. I mean, it's a fact that the video that she was critiquing, and she was critiquing it as she was pointing out that there are other evangelical voices out there, like the Cornwall Alliance with Cal Beisner, and that so there are a variety of views, and why weren't those represented? If all he was trying to do was get people to engage this issue, why was it so one-sided? And that's a fair point. And when she raised that fair point, he completely lost it. So the mask went down, and he was vicious. And I'd say that is telling. And again, I'm not going to judge I don't know what's going on in his heart, but what I do know is that objectively speaking, he did a video that was very one-sided, that was clearly designed to persuade people about global warming catastrophism. Fine. He can make that view. I don't think that's a gospel salvation issue. That's fine. But when he was called out for it being one-sided, he went ballistic. How dare you challenge? You're smearing me. You're doing this. You're doing that. Methinks one does protest too much. And so I do think that in cases where someone, it's pointed out that they're being one-sided and that they don't either own it, because he could have owned it and said, well, that's right. I did do the one side because I'm persuaded that is accurate. But he didn't want to do that. He wanted to be perceived as morally that he was this neutral party that didn't really have a stake in the argument, and that was called into question when it was pointed out that what he did was so one-sided. And I will say for myself, in the evangelical Christian subculture, this is going back to when I was at Seattle Pacific, and even my work with Discovery, there's this evangelical nice, which means that, to people's face, you say one thing and then you stab them in the back. And it's not healthy. And I'd say that when people protest with invective about someone who's raising some, serious questions about what they do, and they're trying to shut them down, which is what they were trying to do with Megan Basham. I think that is a warning sign that the people who are giving the one-sided view are not honest brokers.
Well, you've said a lot there. I mean, we've had Cal Beisner on this channel. It's been a while. We have to have Cal back. But I have, I go to a lot of academic theology conferences, and the environmental catastrophism, again, is such like an ingrained narrative that you almost have to get on board with if you want to be taken seriously as a theologian. And I have met Gavin Ortlund once, but it was several years ago, and he was still pastoring his church in California before he went sort of online. And so I don't know him at all. But I can see, again, like falling into that because you think this is sort of what you have to do to be accepted in the guild or whatever. And I mean, that's a problem.
But to me, the test is how you respond. Yeah. So I get all that.
Yeah, sure.
And for me, a better response would be, so I gave the side, Megan, that I thought was the most persuasive.
Yeah.
End of story.
Right, exactly.
But he wants to be perceived as this neutral party, that all I was doing was raising questions and doing this. In fact, I'll get really controversial here. Say on the right wing, you have people who are just raising questions about Hitler, just raising questions about racism. No, they're not. They're spewing vile stuff. Well, on the left wing or the more left side, you have the evangelical nice, people like Gavin Ortlund. Oh, I was just raising questions about climate change. No, he wasn't. So own up, mensch up with your, what you're actually arguing. And then when someone actually points it out, to respond with invective about them. And this is also this evangelical nice. I do think we should be civil, but I also think we need to be honest. And where I get my dander up is when someone claims the mantle of civility. And I saw this when I was a college professor, internal dynamics. The mantle of civility and love that wouldn't allow anyone to criticize in the most civil manner possible. But then if you did raise something, you were demonized as being uncollegial or unloving. And it's that hypocrisy is not good for, say, Gavin Ortlund's own soul, let alone, and I don't want to pick on Gavin because I don't know him, but I saw, the one reason I got involved in that debate when that came out is because that was something I saw as a college professor, that too many evangelicals, they dress themselves up as, we're nice evangelicals, we need to be loving, until they are challenged on something, no matter how civil, then they just, the fangs come out. And there's never any question of, how do you reconcile this?
Well, this is super important. I've written, I just wrote an article on who's a guy who was a master of this was Pope Francis. I mean, people believe Pope Francis was, this sweet, harmless, tolerant, just a gentle soul, but everybody just scratched the surface. And behind the scenes, he ruled. I mean, his tenure in the Vatican he ruled it like a South American dictator. Everybody will tell you, he was, if people raised challenges against him, bishops just got fired, and he put in who he wanted and he fired people without justification. And, but he comes off as the who am I to judge Pope, but he did plenty of judging at the end of the day. But this idea too of like, I'm just raising questions. Al Mohler in a recent briefing episode where he was talking about Francis called it the theology of suggestion, right? I'm just suggesting, and it's very suggestive, but you're not presenting the other side of the view. You're not presenting the other side of the coin at all. So again, it's this one-sided.
And you may be actively trying to prevent the other side from being brought out.